Okay, so for the final part of this tutorial, we're going to be combining the images in Photoshop. You remember we had rendered out four elements: the actual image itself, which is the RGB, the alpha, the background channel, and the z-depth. We have to combine these all into one Photoshop file so that we're able to use each element to kind of tweak and edit the scene. You may notice if you've just watched the very last tutorial that I've re-rendered this while filming and working on the file. I accidentally deleted some of the files I needed, so we just did it one more time, and I'm really happy with this result. Alright, so to bring them all together, I'm just going to select all and copy the alpha. While back in my we'll call this one the final one, I'm going to go to channels and create a new channel and paste in my alpha. That's just going to allow me to easily select the background and the foreground. I'm also going to select, I have to be on layer, to select the backgrounds, and then coming back to the final. See here I have my alpha selected so I can't see anything. I'm going to turn on the RGB. This should paste onto a new layer. That's easy. And again with the z-depth layer, I need this to be on a channel. So back in Photoshop I create a new channel and paste the z-depth. And I'm going to call this z-depth so it's easy to remember. So back to RGB. So now we have the background and the foreground. I want to select everything except the clouds. So if I click, control left click this little button here, the alpha, it selects all that's white. So you can see where that red is. That's where the mask it's not selecting. Now I'm going to go back to channels, control shift I to invert the selection. Oh, sorry, I don't need to do that. Control shift I sends it back to where it was, and I'm just going to delete this black. So now I have, you can see that just the sky there. If I deselect by hitting Control D, there's a thin black line here that I don't really want, and that's because there is a little discrepancy. Honestly, I'm not sure why there's a black line there, but if I edit undo and bring back my my selection, I can go select, modify, expand, just 1 pixel, and if I delete that, now we have kind of a white edge, which isn't any better. So let's step back, Control Alt Z twice will bring back the black line, and while I'm on my background layer, I might just be able to lightly feather that out. So I'm going to use my eraser tool, set my opacity really low, like 9%. I'm going to shrink my brush size, and I'll zoom in here and just see if I can take a little bit of that out. So, I don't mind that there's an edge there, because there is. I just don't want it to be as pronounced as this is showing. Alright, so just try to wash some of it away. Also trying to be careful not to get too much of the sky, because it's it'll look like I've eaten away the sky too, which I don't want. So zooming all the way back out, that's a little better. Could probably stand to use a little more, but as we move through it, I'm actually going to create a little glare, which will help mask that. So the next thing to do is to go in, and I like to edit the the levels and adjustments using adjustment layers. So by clicking things like brightness and contrast, I can control the rendering itself and kind of post effect this to the style and kind of quality of image I'm looking for. Another great one is curves. I usually find that coming down in the black range and up in the white range brings a kind of more dynamic contrast to everything. But I want to be careful. I don't ever want to be too far-fetched that it loses its qualities that I've spent so much time rendering. Let's see, another one I like to do sometimes is the photo filter. It has warming filters and cooling filters, and you can see how it just changes the temperature of the image. So there's a couple different ones. Maybe just a little warmer image would be nice. I can control how much, and it starts to be pretty wild. And I want to make sure that this cloud layer, which is the background layer, is below all these adjustment layers, so they're also being adjusted, and it's going to help it match better. So you can go through a few more of these if you like. There's specific hues and saturations, vibrances. There's a lot of things you can play with, and little by little you can kind of tweak the image into something else. But The last thing I want to do is to flatten my background clouds into the background layer. And to do that easily, I hit Control and E. And lastly, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Lens Blur. Lens Blur brings up a dialog box where I can control kind of where the focus of the camera would be. This is something you could do in Vray, but it takes additional time in the rendering, and really it's quickly adjustable in Photoshop. Photoshop's already determined that I want to use that Z depth channel that I had brought in. As you remember, the Z depth is kind of this black to white gradient based on the depth of the object in the rendering. So now using that, I can click and say like, okay, I want to focus right here. And if I increase the radius here, you can see how completely blown out this portion is. And if I clicked back there, then my foreground is blown out and this little part is in focus. So I'm going to definitely reduce the radius so that only a little bit of blur happens. And I'll set my focus right here in the middle. So at the end here, it starts to get a little blurry. You can see that a little bit of a problem I'm having here is that I've brought in that background layer, deleted some of it, and it's now given my building a little bit of a halo. So that's something I should spend some time working on, but I'm not going to do that for the tutorial. So final few things. I like to add in kind of a blowout effect, right? Like just to know that it's a bright sunny day. You know, sure, for the most photorealistic renderings, you may not want to do this, but for me, it often just kind of brings a little extra visual interest. So with a white to transparent gradient, I'm just going to drag down, and right now you can see I've selected kind of the radial gradient. So if I pull that down, that's not what I wanted. I was reversed. I'm going to click this again. So we'll have that, and I'll just lower the opacity of this layer little by little until it's somewhere that I'm happy. So right now that's 4%. Maybe I'll bring it up to 7. Okay, we're at 15% there. And again, I can come in with my brush for my eraser and just erase portions of that, which it's just the slightest change, but I think it helps kind of fade the rendering out. The other similar technique you could do, we turned off vignetting in the rendering, but we can turn that back on. So again, we'll use a black to transparent. This time I am going to reverse it, use a radial, and go from somewhere in the middle of the image to the corner. And you can see now it's all gray around. So I don't have black selected. I'm going to select my black, drag this one out. There's the vignette. And I can drop this down as much as I want to kind of just add a little style to the rendering. And maybe I want to put the white on top so I'm not vignetting out my my blowout. So there you have it. There's the final thing. If I really wanted to, I could come in and add Photoshop people or trees, plants, all of that kind of stuff. But I think I'm happy with this. So I usually end up saving a Photoshop file so I can work with it later if I need to, and maybe a JPEG to go on my website or portfolio. If you have any questions, comments, or would like to see a new tutorial, go ahead and email me. You can find my contact information on my website, ckmca.com.